also press the recording button. There we go. I have a couple of colleagues more just entering the room, but we go ahead. So good morning, everyone, and welcome on behalf of UITP, the bus unit, and the Clean Bus Europe Platform Consortium. We are very, very happy to have you here today in this second webinar of the series for capacity building and knowledge exchange. This webinar has the topic of clean bus procurement. It's of course a very relevant topic for all of us, and we have today for the session two experts on the matter who will be presenting the specific case of the Netherlands. Also, my colleague Maarten Post is the head of the bus unit. He will be also providing a brief introduction, so we can have the perfect setting to go ahead. I see people continues entering, so that's very good. So from my side, I will be on the regie and also trying to keep the technical aspects also aligned with the presentation. So if you see me in between lines, sometimes it's just apologies for that. But yeah, I think we can go ahead. And as I said, so our speakers today, first speaker is Maarten Post. He is a procurement expert and manager of the electric bus transport at Provincie Noord-Brabant. It's the public transport authority. And we have also Bart Kraaijvanger, he's manager of the zero emission program at Transdev Group, which is the PTO, the public transport operator in the region Eindhoven, and of course many other regions in the world. So to keep it short from my side, the program today is made of two parts. Basically, we will have a first part with a short introduction by my colleague Maarten Post on the what is basically introduction to clean bus procurement models and what are also the main points for the energy transition. Then we go further with the presentation of procurement in the Netherlands, the case of the province Noord-Brabant by Maarten, and then we will continue with the example of Transdev in Eindhoven and Amsterdam, how an operator, how a public transport authority are dealing with procurement. At the end, we will have questions and answers and a round all together. So we are ready, and we thank you, the ones who have already sent us some questions. We have kept this for this round session at the end of the conversation. Some key points of what is today's goal, and we hope you help us, of course, to define these goals and to achieve them during this session. We aim to be able to provide you a clear understanding of what is clean bus procurement, what is the process, what are the steps, what are the main aspects that you should take into account when you start planning for a tender, what is important to consider upfront even before you start planning, what are the challenges you will be facing, and of course, which sources of information can be useful for you. Before we continue, just a brief remarks. What is the etiquette for this session today? Please, everyone, at this stage, I know everyone has already done so many tests, as you know, but please, everyone, mute yourself unless you are aiming to talk or you, of course, need to make any point. For questions, we invite you to use the chat. It's easier for us to follow up. But of course, you can also raise your hand. And whenever you might need and wish to take the word, please, I would also ask you to switch on your camera. That eases a bit for me identifying who would like to talk. Again, I would like to remind you this session is being recorded. If there's any issue on your side that you would like to be recorded, please just take this into account. And yes, we just go ahead. We thank you all for being here, and we are looking forward to a very successful and fruitful workshop. Thank you very much. I give the floor now to my colleague Maarten Post, who will be presenting the introduction. Arno, the floor is yours. I can continue sharing, and you just ask me to pass next.
Thanks. I opened the mic, and here I am. Good morning, everybody. Also on my behalf, Bus Unit UITP. A few yeah, introductory words. I would say maybe also because the presentations that we will hear today are from the Netherlands, use case from the Netherlands, and I thought it might be important to frame the Dutch case in Europe, and knowing that the attendance, so you are here numerous in the room, are from all different countries across the Union. It would be important to have some background on the procurement models and the way how public transport is organized as such. Here, public transport is transforming. I mean, definitely in the UITP and in the bus unit, we have seen, let's say, the cleaning efforts for the bus domain increasing. Maybe a milestone to remind 2017, when the European Commission published this declaration for the initiative of the Clean Bus Europe. 2019, and the European Parliament adopted the Clean Vehicle Directive, and then 2021, this directive is transposed in 27 states. And we see across those years increasing number of electric buses coming into the different countries, and we are in a sort of, we'd call it the scaling up phase, depending on the countries, it's true. But we will hear today that for at least the Netherlands, which is the leading member state, they are, let's say, in progress, and we hope that there are definitely lessons to learn from Dutch case. Next slide. Still to stay in the Netherlands, I thought you see here on the picture actually our speakers, right? Because we have the Provincie Noord-Brabant, which is on the bottom line. You see there a bubble, which is actually one of the concession areas in that province, and it's the Public Transport Authority. And I think later on, Maarten, you will call this area the ZOP area, right? So Zuidoost-Brabant, which means the southeast of Brabant. So this is one of the examples that will be presented. And then there's a second bubble close to Amsterdam. It's called number 6. This is one of the concession areas of the province, of Amsterdam. And there we have specifically also contribution from Bart from Transdev Connection, actually operating the electric buses in both concession areas, but we will have we will not have the PTA with us from Amsterdam. In next slide, maybe also important for UITP knowledge exchange and the knowledge building. We have been updating last year the tender structure document, which is a sort of guideline document for members to help making specifications and also to organize tender processes. And here we really made an update to include all the specificities around e-mobility. And the biggest learning point that we try to put into this document is that we are really changing from a vehicle procurement, let's say from a diesel vehicle procurement, I would say tradition and also business, to a complete different approach in the procurement when it comes to e-bus system procurement. Next slide. Models, business models for public transportation, and versus the players involved. That's also one important point to highlight, that previously in the bus business we were mainly talking about PTOs and bus OEMs for let's say for a procurement market. Of course, also the cities and the PTAs, but the procurement and commissioning and specifications of the buses was really a tight activity between the operators and the OEMs, and we see that with the electrification and let's say this evolution towards a system dimension, we enter also in a whole bigger range of stakeholders that have a place and a role to play into the procurement. I mentioned here, of course, the city administrations. So you could imagine when there are different communes or towns that needs to give, for instance, building permissions for example, electrical infrastructure and cables, but also the involvement of, let's say, the electricity companies and the grid owners are, yeah, we could say new kids on the block in this process. And we will hear today from our presenters how, yeah, also the new stakeholders are involved in the procurement. Next slide. When actually looking to the markets, to the public transport markets in Europe, I mean, it's definitely not the case that because it is one European Union that it is one, I would say, uniform yeah, way of how the market is looking. We have different conceptions of how to organize the markets, and we could say go from unregulated or deregulated markets, which is very strong in the UK, to yeah, more shapes of regulated markets, and also yeah, let's say delegated management let's say models that we have in different European countries. And depending on your situation and depending on how the market for public transport is organized in your country, I think it's important to keep that in mind when we listen to the experience from the Netherlands, to what extent this is of use or could be of value for your own situation. I will not go too much into detail because an entire, let's say, UITP training on this, but maybe here an interesting picture that I borrowed from Didier van der Velde, who's one of our lead trainers in, I would say, the Public Transport Market Organization, showing just the overview of the organizational forms for public transportation. So you see on the right side the markets where this is mainly driven by a market initiative, and on the left side where markets are organized through an authority-driven initiative, which very often work with concessions. And today, for the example of Noord-Brabant, we are in the Netherlands. In the case of the PTA authority, on the left side, I would say, with an yeah, a model where they tender the public transport traffic, so private concession in the market, and that as part of such traffic concession, the procurement of the buses, and for us today of the e-bus system, is encapsulated. And important, yeah, maybe to underline here, it's the note in the box on the left here, and it's important for everybody of us that the commercial tendering, so and the subcontracting for services is in fact something that can be realized in any of the blue cases. So it is really independent of the organizational form of public transport. Next slide. Yeah, level of decisions of public transportation, of course, very important for our seminar today to see where are the decisions taken for going to zero emission or to clean. I think here for the strategic level, if we look to the decision bodies in the PTAs, they set the general goals, transport policy, market share, profitability. And for us, of course, the goals around zero emission, decarbonization, or even fossil fuel targets would be specifically set on this very high level, this political level. And then when we go down to the technical level, it is answering more the question which services can then help to achieve these aims. And this can be done through the market. For instance, in the Netherlands, this is the case in the competitive tendering. And then this means that already this technical answer on the services characteristics and which vehicles should be procured is part of the operator who is preparing the bid. And I think this is also something that might be in different situations, different parts of Europe have a different share on which stakeholder does what. Maybe to close, Aida, one final word, or maybe the before final word, is that according, let's say, to the public transport model in your place, that let's say the role that each stakeholder plays is of course completely different, and I would say let's have our ears open and our minds open to really listen from our presenters from Noord-Brabant and from Transdev, how they let's say step into their role in their specific case. Here is, I thought it may be nice to show a sample of the public transport contracts in Europe. It is an example also coming from the UITP training, where you see a bit the different regimes between direct award, competitive tendering, and commercial basis, which means basically a deregulated market in the UK. It's green, and then you see in Sweden where almost everything is tendered on a competitive basis, and probably today from the Netherlands, I would assume that the Netherlands should maybe be close to Sweden, or maybe between Finland and Sweden, I would say, but indeed the vast majority of the public transport contracts are let's say in the competitive tendering regime. Yeah, this is you. Thank you for being on this webinar. So high interest in this aspect on the technical support for tendering and procurement. I mean, I think you made a vote earlier in the process on the topics where you would need maybe more insight and support from the Clean Bus Europe platform. So all those cities, including the cities stakeholders, are interested, and most of you are present today. So a pleasure to be with the European family around the table, and maybe to connect you as a participant and a learning city. I prepared also the next slide. It is also to remind the mechanism of this Clean Bus Europe platform that we are doing in UITP. So you see on the right box the host cities, and today our host cities are the stakeholders from the Provincie Noord-Brabant, PTA, and the PTO. And then on the left side, what we call the target cities, that are you in the audience, who are, let's say, eager to listen and to learn. And we try, let's say, through this, I would say, matrix of services and also of events, eventually technical visits on site to help you, to be of help for you through this Clean Bus Europe platform. And I leave maybe the floor now to our host city, because they, I would say, have all the knowledge to share. Thank you, Aida, for the introduction.
Thank you, Arno. I hope it's at least this first brief introduction, clear and helpful for everyone. Indeed, we have in the room many of the cities that have expressed interest in the technical support for tendering. So we are 51 participants in the room today. It's a fantastic big round. I want also to tell you we have also our good colleague Gerard Helboer from the PTA in Amsterdam, so I think we are going to have a very interesting discussion. Without further ado, I would like to give Maarten Post the floor.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be with you and to share you some experiences with the procurement of zero-emission buses in our province, the province of Noord-Brabant. I will do that in 4 steps, as you can see here. A short introduction, then a use case on the procurement of the buses in the southeast of Brabant. We talk a little about the role of the authority of the province as a public transport authority, and we also look at the lessons learned. Next slide, please. As we all know, I think the transition to zero emission buses is a kind of transition. So in 2011, when we started the process in our province, we made this roadmap for the transition, and this roadmap consists of 3 phases. The first phase you could call was the phase of technical experiments, technical pilots, to show that the buses and the loading infrastructure did do their job. The second phase was the phase of what we call system pilots. So you don't pilot with 1 or 2 buses, but you pilot with 10 buses, for instance, just to get experience on the system you work with. The third phase is the phase of scaling up, and that's that you use your experience in your tendering process to get this transition on the road, so to say. Next slide, please. What really helped was that in the Netherlands, all the PTAs, and that were about 14, signed an administrative agreement on zero emission buses in the Netherlands. This agreement was signed in 2016. All PTAs involved, as I said, and there were 3 main goals in this agreement. The first goal was that public transport in the Netherlands should be zero emission in 2030. The second goal was that from 2025 onwards, new buses should be zero emission. And the third goal was that in 2025, zero emission buses use 100% renewable energy generated in the region. That last goal was a result of the climate talks in Paris in 2015. And so in making this agreement, we said, well, we should also do something about the energy transition. But that last one is still in discussion in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. In the Netherlands, we also have a lot of knowledge institutes that help us with the monitoring on the transitions, for instance, but also help us in understanding drivetrains and so on. This is just an overview you can use later on to see what's happening, or you can look at their websites for the information they give to us all. Next slide. Let's go to the zero emission buses in Eindhoven. The slide is not too well because the border of the concession area is a bit shifted to the left, but well, that's no problem. Yeah, next slide, please. What are the tasks and responsibilities of the province of Noord-Brabant being a PTA? As Arno also pointed out, we set the goals for our public transport. We are responsible for contracting. We select a public transport operator after a public tender, so it's a competitive model in this case. And we do that by terms of reference. It's a kind of functional procurement. We state the main lines that we want to have operated, and we state the quality of the services. But for instance, we don't state which buses the operator should use. We state that there should be zero emission buses, but which zero emission buses we leave to the public operator to fill it in its tender bid. Also, we make the documents, of course, including the awarding criteria and the way we will use those criteria.
Ya continúo yo, Muchas
Okay.
gracias.
Excuse
And
me, can you please mute your
we
mic?
give a subsidy to the operator, which is about 60% in the Netherlands of the total costs of the operation, and the other 40% comes from fares from the travelers. Next slide, please. The operator in our model is responsible for buying and maintaining the rolling stock. He is responsible for the charging infrastructure, for the depots, and in the Netherlands, most of the time, the bus manufacturer coordinates the setup of the new system. He is the system integrator. To see that buses and infrastructure are well aligned. Of course, the operator is responsible for the services, timetable, drivers, fuels, and whatsoever. And the operator is, of course, also responsible for fare collection. Next slide. What are the main goals of our tender? And this is the situation of 2015, 2016, when we did this tender in Eindhoven. First of all, we want a good network of the services, because public transport is there for the public. So we focus on the customer and the quality of the travel experience of that customer. And in 2015, we said, if possible, within financial, operational, and technical means, we want zero emission, or at least a transition to zero emission in our tender. And that should be a gradual transition, because we all know that these zero emission bus systems are still evolving in quality and so on. So it would be very unwise to do it in one big stroke, but you better do it gradually over a couple of years. And therefore, we also stated that we would transfer the vehicles to the next concession to make things not too expensive. Next slide, please. Then how did we put things in place? Here you see the different awarding criteria we used. I think most of you will recognize these awarding criteria: market position, network and schedules, customer interfaces, the comfort of the rolling stock, operational quality, of course, and zero emission transition. In the two tenders we did before Eindhoven, we set the percentage of zero emission transition on 4% instead of 11.5%. And those two, that tender didn't end up with a significant bid on zero emission at that moment. There was in one of the bidders would use electric buses in the city of Breda, but that PTO didn't win the tender. So 2 years later, we just put that percentage of zero emission transition in the awarding model to 11.5%, and we're talking about 2015. And well, that was at that time, that percentage was, I think, almost too high. When we were in the preliminary talks around the tender, there were about 4 or 5 PTOs that were interested in the tender. But at the end of the procedure, and the PTOs had to hand in their bids, there was only one left, Hermes Transdev in this case. So maybe that 11.5% was at that time a little bit too high, but there was a very interesting bid of Hermes, and the bid fulfilled all the requirements of our tender. So the concession was ordered to Hermes in that case. Next slide, please. What was the result of the tender? We had more public transport than in the years before. We had a better customer interface. They offered us comfortable buses. They offered us operational excellence. There's also in the tender a transition towards new ways of mobility from just in sharing smaller amounts, smaller vehicles, all that kind of new lines within the within public transport are possible within this tender. And there was also a transition to zero emission. The PTO started with 43 zero emission buses in Eindhoven, 18 meters, articulated buses, and there were two phasing in moments later on in the concession. I will come to that on a later slide. And there wasn't any additional budget needed on our side. That had been there on that point. There has been some discussions in the Netherlands, because probably there were some extra investments on the side of the PTO and the bus manufacturer. But for us, the bid was within the limits of our own budgets. Next slide, please. When I was between 2016 and 2018, I also was the program manager on the national agreement in the Netherlands, working for the different provinces in the Netherlands. And this slide takes us through the lessons we learned in general in the Netherlands in total. First of all, what we did was a step-by-step procurement. Take it slow. And we have a concession calendar in the Netherlands that has procurements every year. So using each other's experience helped us stepping up on this transition. Secondly, it was important to properly award zero emission in the tender. And we did that by asking the PTO to start with the bus and award that the amount of buses he started with. We awarded if there was a transition to 100% zero emission. And also we, in the beginning, we awarded the participation in pilots. Whether or not that's still necessary in the situation we are now in 2021 is a question, I think. We also allowed the PTO to start with used buses. It was common in the Netherlands to start every new timetable, every new concession with new buses. But in these cases, we allowed the PTO to start with used buses. That makes it easier for the PTO to get his business case competitive to a diesel business case. We also made it a guided transition, and we held the stakeholder to cooperation during the pilots. Another issue was that risks had to be managed. On the greater part by the PTO, but it's a new system in a new environment, so you have to deal with your risks. We also took longer concessions in consideration. But in our case, we used takeover rules for buses and infrastructure to the next concession to get your business case on a competitive level. Next slide, please. Are we ready yet? No, not yet. Still some challenges to a point. In the Netherlands, we also had some discussions about joint procurement, especially around JIVE projects from the European Union. The introduction of hydrogen buses in public transport in the Netherlands and in Europe. Scaling up is still ongoing. Prices are going down. We had to cope with chain and intergovernmental cooperation. The Dutch agreement is an example of that. We also had to find the right pace for the transition. If you go too fast, it will be too expensive, or it gives too much risks. We were also looking at enabling small and medium enterprises to enter the ecosystem. You're creating a new ecosystem, so that's a challenge for the operator and the vehicle manufacturers. Sometimes you need to talk about cross-border cooperation. As you saw the map of the Netherlands, there are about 34 concessions, I think, more or less. And sometimes you have a part of your timetable, bus lines that are cross-border. And with a diesel schedule, you have no problem. But if you need a charging infrastructure on the grounds of another city with another operator, that's still a challenge to get everything in place. You also get discussions about the asset management. For instance, in the Netherlands, most of the assets are held by the operator. For instance, the buses are with the operator, the infrastructure are with the operator, the depots are with the operator. And if in a new tender there is another operator winning the tender, you have to transfer all those assets to the new operator. And in former days, depots were simply, but nowadays depots also held a large amounts of infrastructure, and their strategic, there are of more strategic worth nowadays. And last but not least, if you want to operate electric buses, you need grid connections, and you need them in time. And that's a growing concern in the Netherlands to get that organized. Next slide, please. In the table on the lower side of the slide, you see the phases in which the concession in the southeast of Brabant would go zero emission. The starting year was 2016. Transdev Hermes started then with 43 18-meter articulated buses, and they're still running. In the years 2020, 2021, 60 to 70 standard buses would phase in, and in 2022 to 2024, another 80 buses and about 20-25 taxis should phase in. But then there was COVID, suddenly in 2020, and that also led to a major crisis in public transport by the PTOs. That ended up in the fact that this phasing in was not done in 2020, 2021, but was just delayed to the end of next year. And that's more or less certain, but we don't know it for 100%. And next slide, please. COVID-19 led to an open dialogue about how to maintain services and how to keep the public transport operators from going bankrupt. And it also led to discussions about financial engineering. First of all, there came a strong support package from national and regional authorities that had the goal that the operators could maintain a basic timetable, although the fares were going down for about 90% or so in that period. We also had a dialogue on lowering the cost for the zero emission transition, because the PTOs were reluctant to finance the transition at that specific moment, given the COVID-19 situation. And we discussed several options with Transdev and Hermes in the southeast of Brabant. First of all was the bus loan from the regional authority to the PTO with better conditions than the normal financing would go by a bank. Amsterdam also used that a few years ago. And the other option was reshuffling the risks between the PTO, the PTA, and the bank, which would lead to lower financing costs. And in the region of Southeast Brabant, we chose that line. Next slide, please. To take you along this path and show you what happens in the normal situation. The PTA pays a subsidy for the exploitation, which consists of the exploitation itself, but also the cost of the buses and the infrastructure. And the PTO pays the lease to the bank, in this case ING. What we did is that we constructed a special purpose company to be the owner of the material of the buses and the infrastructure. And we, as a concession authority, as the PTA, we guaranteed that the lease is paid at all times to the SPC, and the SPC can always pay to the bank. And that's for the bank, the province has a lower risk than the PTO. So in this construction, the bank was willingly to lower its financial rates, which leads to a lower total cost of ownership for this concession. Yeah, next slide, please. So we're now in 2021. When we did the tender in 2016, we challenged the operators in competition to get zero emission started. Nowadays, we are in 2021. We are preparing new tenders for East and West Brabant, and it will be a lot less challenging and a lot more demanding. Scaling up in 2021, the system proved its liability. Prices are getting down. So in our next tenders, we will demand zero emission for most of the timetable, and there will be some challenging in the tender documents on hard to electrify parts of the timetable. For instance, we have lines from the city of Breda to Utrecht, and there are long lines in which the buses use the highway with high speeds, and those lines are still hard to electrify. So there we will challenge the PTOs to get maybe still a transition towards 100% at the end of 2030. Thank you very much. I think this was the last. Yes, it was.
Thank you very much, Maarten. I think we can take perhaps two questions now, if there is already something burning in your minds. And if not, we can keep it for the end, for the questions and answers round. But I think the presentation is very illustrative of what are the challenges definitely now, and how a PTA can ensure that a transition to a new technology can be made, definitely with some barriers, especially at the beginning. So of course the recommendation of considering a gradual transition, and thus making progress through a progressive introduction of buses, as the technology also and the industry is improving the products. Also, what are the main options that we can consider when it comes to intercity lines? I think there is many interesting questions that Maarten has raised, and yeah, I think this can be a good path to follow for the questions and round discussion. Perhaps if there is no question, as I don't see, well, let me just check quickly the chat. Exactly. Okay, I see here. Yes, we have here. Just let me go quickly through it. One moment. How often? We have a question from Clement. How often do you or did change the operator, Maarten?
Well, our concession time mostly is about 8 to 10 years. And in the case of Southeast Brabant, it's 10 years. So the concession started in 2016 and it ends in 2026.
Thank you. We have also a question of Rogier last. Are prices still going down regarding the current situation? The prices, Rogier, you can perhaps specify a bit. You mean the prices of the bus, the prices of the contract with the bank, of the loan?
Yeah, maybe that's a question that Bart can answer, because as I stated, we are procuring on timetables and so on. And in preparing the bid, the operator goes to a manufacturer and asks for prices. So most of the time we don't even see the prices, or we don't see the price of that the operator pays to the bus manufacturer. We get from the operator a price for every driven kilometer.
Okay, taking note of it. Rogier, I hope this answers your question. After Bart's presentation, we can perhaps retake it.
Maybe I can add something towards the answer of Maarten on the prices of buses. When we procured the buses in 2015, 2016 for the Brabant concession, there were just a limited number of bus suppliers who could offer e-buses. So there was not much competition. What we now see is that there are Sorry, there's someone.
Yes,
with
there
his
is
mic on.
someone with the open mic. Yeah.
We see that there's more competition now, but what we see is that not directly the prices of the buses go down, but you get more value for money, and that's what I mean with the size of the battery or the capacity of the battery is much larger than it was in 2015, 2016. So and that's indirectly lower your cost because a larger battery means less charging moments, so more efficient timetables in most of the cases.
Perfect.
But
Thank you, Bart.
we hope and expect that the price of buses and batteries will go down in the future.
Yes, indeed, that's definitely what the studies and the trend is showing. That of course the technology is already mature for already some years, but it continues developing, and especially the battery technology, the battery development is there. So we expect definitely.
Aida, is UITP monitoring the bus prices?
The bus prices itself not as some let's say a monitoring list, but definitely from the different projects we are involved in, we have sometimes access to this, and then you can see indeed that the prices of course are going down. I don't know, Arno, if you can add up here if we have any specific study or.
Yeah, of course it's always a sensitive issue because we are coming closer to the market, to the commercial side of the market. We had let's say as UITP to adopt last June anti-competition policy, right? Also a bit to manage this properly. You know, we do not collect prices of e-buses. I remember in the Paris event last week we do this for fuel cell buses, but in the framework of Jive, and it's I would say more peculiar because it's of course really a niche market, and part of the target of Jive project is to get the costs down of procurement of fuel cell bus. But beside that, we don't monitor that in UITP. What we can do, of course, is always to help a question or to help a request coming from a country or a city to put in contact with another UITP member, and then I would say we let on the two parties exchange, I would say, without UITP presence on this commercial issue.
Yes, thank you, Arma, for that. We have also a question from Ray. Is the overall sustainability footprint of the business factored into the tender, or does the tender ignore other business activities?
Is it a question for me, Aida, or I don't know?
For both of you, whoever feels it can be.
We don't have in our tenders, we do not state something about a sustainability footprint. We do discuss it, for instance, over a question whether or not we would allow heating on fuels, for instance, because heating and the air conditioning and the heating in an electric bus just ask a lot of energy from the battery that you cannot spend on your drivetrain, for instance. So there is discussion about, and that's something about the total footprint also. And sometimes if there is still a part of the fleet not zero emission, you could state awarding criteria around CO2 emissions. And that would lead to the use of synthetic fuels or HVOs or something like that to lower your CO2 footprint.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Maarten. I see we have also a question from Monse. from AMB. Perhaps I think, Monse, this is a question that I believe Bart will be able also to reply after his presentation. So perhaps we go, Bart, ahead, and I give you the floor, and then we can take up the Monse's question. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, then here we go. Floor is yours.
That's my first slide, and that's me. So please, next one. I will start first with a message towards the PTA. It's more or less a summary of what Maarten just presented. So what we advise to our PTA is to make a transition towards a zero emission operation as successful as possible. The PTA should create conditions that allow solutions offering integration of subsidies and green loans within the tender, extend the depreciation periods for e-buses and infrastructure, so extend or make use of the lifetime of your assets. In the case of the Netherlands, most of the time it's 15 years. So the contract length is 10 years with a transfer agreement of the assets towards a new operator, so you are able to depreciate the assets in 15 years. And that's the same as the next bullet, use the full economical lifetime of the e-buses, what I mentioned, those 15 years. And sharing ownership and risk to be clearly specified with the tender documents. So who's owner of the buses, who's owners of the charging infrastructure, who bears the risk of the availability of those two assets, and play a good role in coordination between the authorities and the permits the operator needs to install the charging infrastructure, for instance. So yeah, please, next slide. So this is an overview of the steps we take when a tender is issued. When a PTA issued his tender, then there are requirements in which he wants to be in his bid. And and you also see how you are the most successful to win the tender. So when we know those requirements, we start with the zero emission ambition, for instance, of Zuidoost-Brabant or AML, because Gerrit is also in the audience. So and then we look at what requirements are there and what bus types and features suits the best to these requirements. Are we going to fulfill the requirements with battery electrical buses, or do we even need fuel cells? Then you look at the timetables, which gives an indication of your battery size and your range you have to cover. And you also have to look at the climate, environmental factors. Are we allowed to heat the bus with HVO, or do we have to do it electric? Then you know what infrastructure you will need for those buses. And you have your charging strategy can be defined. Do we have the charging strategy of just overnight charging, or do we also need opportunity charging during the day? And then you also see what number of buses you need, and also the number of drivers, because when you make the transitions towards a zero emission bus fleet, you also have to take the charging moments into account, and that might lead to an additional number of buses to make the charging possible. And when you have made all these steps, you can calculate your financial consequences and make the decision if you can offer the best bid towards your PTA to win this tender. And then you also know how your procurement strategy will look like. So please, next slide. So when we started the procurement of the buses of Eindhoven for the ZOB concession, we realized that we were going to buy a system instead of a bus, because we not only bought buses but also the charging infrastructure. There were just a limited number of experienced bus suppliers and a limited number of experienced charging infrastructure suppliers, and we had to procure and realize a grid connection. That was all new for us, And then we have to deal with battery restrictions, for instance, the range, because a battery has a shorter range than a diesel bus, the fading of the battery, and you have to make a range calculation based on the worst case conditions. So mostly of the time that's during the winter times in the Netherlands. And that's why it's very important to contract the right battery specs, the use conditions and the warranty. So when we all realized this, we decided for the Z2B concession to search for a partner who could help us with making the best offer towards Zuidoost-Brabant. And we find a partner in VDL who was also willing to take some risk in this in delivering and operating and maintaining such a large e-bus fleet for the first time in the Netherlands. So because of this risk sharing, we also make a commitment towards VDL that they would also deliver the bus for the second phase. And we also made them system responsible for the bus and the charging infrastructure. So we had only one phone number to call if there was any problem. So this was the strategy we decided to do for the Z2B concession, because it was the first time. And 1 year later, there was already the AML tender. And there we decided to split the procurement of the buses and the charging infrastructure, because in the AML concession there was also phase-wise introduction of e-buses allowed. So, and at that time we did not know if VDL was also the supplier of the second phase of the buses. So we had to split the system responsibility between the bus and the charger. So we took the system responsibility ourselves in the case of AML. So next slide, please. So the challenges we had with procuring zero-emission buses. You have to take into account your operational and your budget constraints, and the technical maturity of the buses, of the zero-emission buses, the battery electrical buses, because there was not that much experience with operating e-buses 5 years ago. And also we had to take into account that the commercial availability was not that large, as I mentioned before. That's why we decided to go with VDL, which is also a company who is based in Brabant. So for them, it was also very important that we succeeded in a successful implementation of those 43 e-buses in Eindhoven. Yeah, next slide. So what do you have to take into account when you procure those an e-bus system? As mentioned, it's buying a system instead of a bus. You have to think about your vehicle specifications. It's more or less your diesel bus specifications added with the specific e-bus specifics. Then you have to think about your charging technology. The ownership of the equipment. In the case of AML and Z2B, the equipment is all owned by the PTO, so by us. And you have to think about, is there anything possible in sharing the risk between different stakeholders? And you also have to make a clear definition about your roles and responsibilities. And for instance, that means mostly in case of the availability of the uptime of your buses and your chargers. Then you have your more challenging in your operations. It has a huge impact on your operations because your drive range limitation, because the heavier weight of the battery, most of the time you have a reduced capacity of your passengers. So do we need more buses for the same amount of passengers and your same timetables? And you have to be aware that you have your competence of your operating, developing an e-bus network is in place. Yes, next slide. So then these are also factors which you have to gonna deal with when you make the transition. Your cost and cost control. How do you gonna finance the more expensive vehicles? your charging equipment, and also your battery replacement. You have to be aware, or you have to be aware or realize that you have to use the buses very efficient. You have to train your driver to drive smart, because every kilometer you can drive extra with on one charge makes your operation more efficient, so less costly. And for that, it's also very important that you have your monitoring of your e-bus performance on real time in place. Those e-buses also have to be maintained and repaired, so you have to be aware that you have to make some adaptations in your depots and your workshop. You have to have special tools, and probably if you are going to store battery storage on your site, you have to have special facilities for storing batteries. And you also have to take into account that you have to train your workshop staff and your drivers. So that's also things to take into account before you start to issue your request for proposals for your e-buses. Then there is risk management you have to be aware of. For instance, your fire prevention and your mitigation of the risk in your operations. In AML, for instance, we had to operate those buses in tunnels, and you need special requirements on your batteries, for instance, to be allowed to drive through tunnels on the Schiphol area. And then there's a risk of interoperability between buses and the charging stations, so they have to communicate with each other. That was also one of the reasons why we started the ZOB concession with the partner VDL. So they were system responsibility, so they were responsible for the communication between the bus and the charger. And before you start your procurement process, you have to identify if you have a phase-wise introduction of e-bus or just a big bang. And in case of a big bang, your grid connection will be future-proof, but in case of a phase-wide introduction, you have to be aware that you have to install a grid connection which is also large enough to also accumulate or with the more buses in the future, so that you can connect your extra chargers also to the same grid connection. So next slide, please. So what about the bus specifications? As mentioned, yeah, you have your normal specification of your diesel bus. And on top of that, you have to think about your specs, especially for e-buses. For instance, your capacity of your battery pack, what capacity do I need? Or which technology do we choose? Do we go for batteries or even ultra capacitors or a combination of those? And you have to be aware that the monitoring of an e-bus fleet is very important. So you have to take into your specification that all the operational data of the buses has to be available for you or your monitoring system. And do you have to specify your battery technology? For instance, do you want to have an LFP battery, an NMC battery, or is it up to the bus supplier to offer the battery technology? And that's all has to do with your C rate, because LFP batteries have a lower C rate than NMC batteries, which means that the charging speed of an LFP battery will be lower than an NMC battery, which has influence on your charging time, and also so might also influence your timetables. So then what air conditioning capacity do I need? What heating technology is allowed, or do I want, is it fully electric, or is a diesel heater on HVO also allowed? And then you, because of the reduced number of passengers in a battery electrical bus, You have to specify the total number of passengers, what you need for your operation in relation to your seating capacity, because seating capacity in the Netherlands is also very important, because it can be a rewarding criteria from the PTA. And then you will have to ask for the energy consumption of the buses within operational condition. And if the supplier cannot deliver these one, there's a nice document from the UITP about e-sort values of e-buses. So that can also help you by specifying your bus specifications. Yes, the next slide, please. One of the most important things in specifying your RFP is the battery. It's also very costly asset in your bus. You have to be aware that this will make or break your operations. So battery procurement conditions. You have to think about, do I want to have a bus price including the battery, or are we going to lease the bus or the battery, for instance? And even more important are the battery warranties and the usage conditions. So what is the charging speed? What is the depth of discharge? How often do I have to balance the battery, or do I even have to balance the battery during the night? That all have influence on your timetable and your operations. So what we advise always is that you should ask for a battery drawing. So there you can see what the total capacity of your battery is at the beginning of life. Then number 2, the useful capacity. That's the capacity you can use for your operations at the beginning of life. And then during the use of the battery, the battery will gonna lose some capacity, and that's what we call the useful capacity at the end of life. So, and what we advise is that you calculate your timetables with the end of life capacity, so that you surely know that you can operate your timetables with the battery you are going to procure. But because when you calculate your timetables with the beginning of life capacity, then after 1 year you will have a problem, because the range of your bus will be decreased. Yes, next slide. And then what's also very important to take into your RFP is the power curve and the current and shock curve, because these curves your planning department needs to calculate how long it takes to charge your battery, depending on the state of charge of the battery, as you can see. So the maximum charge power at this in this graph is between more or less 20% state of charge until 70% state of charge. So after 70% state of charge, the charge power will reduce. So that means that the time to charge to 90 or 100% shock will take more time than when you calculate it with the maximum charge power. So that's you have to be aware of. And the same is at the other diagram with the current and the state of charge curve. There you can see what the current is related towards the state of charge and the charge time. These graphs are very important when you're going to design your timetables. So it's very important that you will ask for them during your procurement process. Yes, next please. Then the third part of your procurement of the system is your charging infrastructure. You have to calculate what number of chargers do I need. Do I need even a backup charger? You have to ask for the unit price per charger and the total charger cost. you have to ask the connection grid capacity from a single charger, so that you can calculate your total grid capacity. You have to take into account your yearly kilometer load, because that is influencing the number of charges per year. So also for the maintenance of your charges, very important. It's the same for the commercial speed of the vehicles, and also the topography of your roads, because when you have very hilly circumstances, your consumption will be higher. So the number of charges will be, charging sessions will be higher. So this all will have influence on your maintenance cost of your charging infrastructure. And then you also have to take into account that your supplier will give you access to your charges, so you are able to monitor your charging equipment. And so you have your monitoring of your buses and your charging in place, and then you can be sure that you can offer robust and reliable e-bus operations. So yes, next slide. So what additional information do we need for the charging infrastructure? Are we going for AC or DC charging? It's in the case of an AC charge system, most of the time the charger is on board of the vehicle. Is slow charging, is that sufficient, or do we need fast charging? In the case of slow charging, yeah, most of the time the charging is done by plug. In the case of the fast charging, then the plug is not sufficient anymore. You need another connector, for instance, a pantograph mounted on the bus or on the infrastructure, a bottom down pantograph or a bottom up pantograph. So in the time we procured the bus of Eindhoven, the position of the pantograph was not standardized in Europe. So there the position of the pantograph was on the middle axle of the articulated buses. Nowadays the standardized position of pantograph is on top of the front axle. So this you have to realize now. And you also want to know what the energy efficiency is of your charger, because when you buy a charger of, for instance, 100 kilowatt, you have to know if you can calculate also with 100 kilowatt when you are charging. And if the efficiency is, for instance, 90%, then you only can calculate with 90% of your 100 kilowatts. So the charging time will take longer than expected. So you have to be sure that the efficiency of the charge is very good, otherwise you have surprises afterwards. Then you could ask for the charging time in case of slow charging, and the charging time in case of fast charging, and what is the maximum C rate which is achievable with the chargers. And one of the most important thing, or even the most important thing, is that you only accept your bus and your charger after there has been a handshake between the bus and the charger, because otherwise, yeah, there are a lot of ISO standards over the communication between bus and charger. But our experience is that, yeah, all buses and chargers have some kind of slang, so there has to be adjusted on each other. So take a handshake between the bus and the charger into your procurement documents, and don't accept them before there has been a successful handshake. Yes, next slide. What's also very important to take into account in your procurement documents are the telematics and some other things. So you need, for instance, an eco-drive system on your e-buses. I should recommend that. Or you already have an in-house eco-drive system. That was the case by us. So we needed a connection towards the data of the bus and the chargers to connect this towards your eco-drive system. And that's the same with the data for your online availability of operational data for instance, the state of charge of the battery during operations. So we can monitor the operations and take the right measurements if something is different from what you planned. Then you also need, for instance, your predictive maintenance, your availability of diagnostic data online or available at the depot. And you have to be aware that you are buying a system. So you buy a bus and a charger, and you have to be sure that you own the data, because data is key in operating e-buses. So other things you have to take into account, what are the towing procedures of e-buses, what are the safety procedures. You are advised to take a spare parts agreement also into your RFP, especially on electric components. And today it's very important because of the shortage on electric components due to the COVID situation, as we experience now every day. And you also could take into account the training for your drivers and your mechanics at the workshop. And then you also have to make an agreement on the after-sales support, because what we do when we buy an e-bus, we want to be sure that there is after-sales support in place in our country. So that's the experience we have. We want to have after-sales support as close as possible. Yes, next slide. So what we also put in our RFP is an availability rate. We contract an availability rate of always of 96%, and we allow the suppliers that might be some lower in the first month after the start of the operations, but after that period, it has to be a 96%, because we need those 96% to offer a reliable operation. Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. Then when you cut your offers from your suppliers, you have your selection criteria. And what we do is our selection criteria are mostly based on a TCO calculation, so the total cost of operations. And those are based on the investment cost of the bus, the maintenance cost proposal, energy consumption, the battery warranty cost, and if necessary, the number of replacements of the battery during the lifetime of the bus, or the lifetime of the duration of our contract. And the number of vehicles, because that's also important, because when you have two offers from different suppliers and they offer different batteries, it could be that from one supplier you need more buses than the other. So that's also what you have to take into account. And then also is the availability rate of the bus, and the same criteria we have for the charging infrastructure. So that's more or less the same. Yes, next slide, please. And then there are also some other criteria which you have to take into account, and that's are the warranty conditions of each supplier the same, both for vehicles and the charging equipment? What are the agreements regarding telematics and the ownership of the data? How does the training offer look like? What is the supplier going to deliver? How does the spare parts agreement look like? And is the after-sales support in place? So on those selected criteria, we select the best supplier. Yeah, so next slide. What are the lessons we learned? And that's that the zero emission is changing the game. Benefits of electrification are established in terms of pollution and noise reduction, but the electric fleet bring new challenges for the operator. And these main challenges are: you have to find the most appropriate technology according to operational needs. What we know is that every operation has its own characteristics. So there's no one-size-fits-all solutions for every operation. So one operation you need fast charging, the other operations you can do it with slow charge. So every time it's a challenge to find the right solution. You have to deal with new stakeholders such as utility providers and civil works contractors, and you have to develop new locations within regulations of the province or the municipalities. And as a PTO, you have to develop new skills internally, particularly in the areas of network design, planning, and driving and maintenance. And the monitoring system for buses and chargers are very important for a reliable operation. So again, be aware or contract that you own the data, because with no data you cannot offer a reliable e-bus operations. And it's already mentioned before also by Maarten, is that we advise that you can do a phase-wise introduction of e-buses better than a big bang. Because when you do it phase-wise, you can benefit from the developments of the development of the maturity of your e-buses and the battery size. So when you do it phase-wise, you can benefit from it. And at the end, the realizing of the grid connection in time is crucial, because when you do not have a connection to its grid, you are not able to charge your fleet, so you are not able to operate. And I think that was my last slide.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bart.
Okay. Some
Thank
questions?
Exactly. We have some already in the chat, and we have also started reacting to some of them over the chat. But I would like to pick back Monse's question. She was asking, how many zero emission buses have you bought, and which are the technologies? So in the exercise that we saw for the region Noord-Brabant and the concession for Eindhoven.
I looked it up. In the concession Southeast Brabant, there are overall about 205 buses, of which 43 are zero emission now. So that's about 20% of the fleet is now zero emission.
Yeah. And we are now in phase 2, in addition on Maarten's antwoord. And in phase 2, we will put another 64 e-buses in operation, and that will be next year.
Yeah, this is indeed also.
And in the case of AML, we started there with 100 articulated e-buses. And since a couple of months, we have there 211 e-buses in operation.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this completes the answer, Monse. We have also another question from Koen Delma. Could you convert your existing depot to e-bus depot, or did you need to find define a new depot or finding even new locations? We have also. Yeah, go for it, Maarten.
Yeah, go for it. In the case of Southeast Brabant, the depot was owned by Hermes, and it was possible to convert the depot itself. So there wasn't a big problem in that case. In the case of our coming West Brabant, we used another path, because there we did see some problems with the location of the depot in relation to a grid connection, and there we took another role as a PTA, where we normally let the ownership of the depot with the PTO or with a local government. In that case, we took the ownership ourselves. So we are now building as a PTA a new depot in Breda, and we also are responsible there for the grid connection. Just to speed it up, because that could take 2.5 to 3 years to get a large grid connection we need for a depot of that size. And there was another question about space needed for alignment of buses and the charging infrastructure, and that's also a challenge in Breda. You need more space, and you need to think about how to align your buses when they are charging on the depot.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to it regarding the Eindhoven depot. We had also to install all those charging infrastructure, and because we needed their opportunity charging, so charging by pantograph. First thing we thought we only charge by pantograph during the day for the fast charge sessions. But because of the limited space, we afterwards decided to do the slow charge during the night also by pantograph. Normally, slow charge you can do by plug, but installing all kind of plugs inside our depot, it was not possible because the space. So the slow charge by pantograph was the solution there.
Yes, and indeed, for the ones who had already the pleasure to have visited the Eindhoven depot, you can see it's constructed on the roof, installed in a ceiling rack, which is of course optimizing the surface that you need for developing the infrastructure. Just a small addition from my side, at the UITP Bus Committee, we are already exploring this topic, meaning what are the main aspects that you need to consider when you convert your depot to a zero emission technology. So this is part of one of our working groups, and we expect to have some results and publications by autumn next year. So indeed, it's a very important topic. Also, I saw some contributions from Ray and from Francois from RATP. And yes, so I guess right now, finding the surface that you need to deploy the infrastructure and even to find the ways to also to comply with the safety regulations and space between buses, etc. This is one of the main questions. I know we are 5 minutes over the time, but I would propose you, if we can stay 10 minutes, of course, those who are able to do so, and we go to the 2-3 questions that we might have already prepared based on the feedback of the participants in advance. So we had one question from our colleagues from
Aida.
Yes.
I'd like to answer 2 other questions that were raised in the chat that can be very...
Please go ahead, Maarten. Go ahead.
First of all, there was the question of there were other benefits for the banks in the construction we used for financing the buses. In the slide deck, there was a hidden slide that shows all the mutual benefits for the bank, for the PTO, and for the PTA. So the slide deck will come available after this workshop, so everyone can look into those benefits themselves. I think we shouldn't elaborate it here more precisely. And there was also a question about collisions.
Yes, it did.
Because of the electric buses have make not so much sound at low speeds. So that could be different. That could be dangerous, and we as a PTA in our tender documents we demand that the buses the PTO uses have a sound warning system that can be manually used by the driver.
Yeah, and that was the case at the first e-buses, Maarten, because that's why we installed a so-called tram bell. But nowadays it's mandatory to have an AFAS system on all buses delivered after, I have to do it by head, 2019, I believe.
Okay, so it's already regulated.
Yeah, it's regulated. And a bus makes sound until it reaches a speed of 20 or 30 kilometers an hour. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Maarten. I think we have covered the ones in the chat, or there is something else open, Maarten?
No, we covered all the questions I saw in the chat.
Super. Thanks a lot for your support on this. We had this question from our colleagues from Koninklijke in Cologne about the standardization, no? About the norms and standards that are considered in the tender documents, and how do other transport companies deal with the preconditioning of buses. So I give the floor again to Maarten to reply to the first on standards.
We saw this question in advance, so I took some time to talk with my colleagues who do the tender documents, and there are some demands the PTA states in those documents. They concern heating and ventilation. For instance, there has to be an airco in it. There should be no CO2 emission on the vehicle. And we state some demands on the ventilation system itself. It's not, it should be this system or it should be that system, but it states the ventilation systems should filter 65% or something like that of particles of that and that size. So it's more functional a way of demanding. We allow fuel heaters until 2029, because the general agreement in the Netherlands states that in 2030 the complete operation should be zero emission. But to help the operators with their timetables, we allow it. But we demand biofuels to be used for those heaters, and we also ask that it is interchangeable by zero emission solutions when that is needed. We have those agreements on that the bus will be used in the next concession also, and then it has to be a complete zero emission system. So some side demands still cameras instead of mirrors nowadays. The warning system we discussed already, and we also demand the installation of parts in the bus that prevent voltage on the casco in case of an accident, mostly on the bottom side of the bus or on the side of the bus. That are the most specific demands on norms norms and standards we use in our tender documents, and maybe Bart can add to that the norms and standards they use in procuring buses and infrastructure.
Yeah, that's the second question, or on this one, because we have normally all our ISO standards and in our procurement documents, mainly in case of communication standards and safety standards. So that's are the common standards. So no other than the European standards we take into account in our procurement documents. Maybe then to the second question, the preconditioning of buses.
Yes,
yeah?
Thanks, Bart. Yes, please.
When we procured the buses from Eindhoven and AML, there was not a standard in place to communicate with the buses via your charger to start up your preconditioning procedure. So at that time we decided to do the preconditioning by a timer, which is inside the bus, and then at a certain time in the morning a bus wakes up and starting his preconditioning procedure. But that's not the most efficient way to do it. So since this year, there's a new communication protocol, the VDV 261, and all the new buses we are now procuring will have this standard. So we are able to give a signal from our charger towards the bus to wake up the bus and start the preconditioning procedure. So until then, it's done by a timer, because it's not allowed to do it via to let the bus on the whole night and then start up again via the charger. That's not safe, so not allowed. So that's why we do not do it that way.
Thanks a lot, Bart, for this. Just opening now for a last question from the floor. If any of you has a question, please just open your mic and shoot. And just take the mic. Don't be shy. I don't see anyone daring to do so, so I would understand this means we are definitely quite clear, and the purposes of the workshop have been achieved. To this state, then I would definitely like to just give you one last message. This is just part of the series of workshops that we are running in the frame of the Clean Bus Europe platform. Indeed, it's one project that it's aiming to support you in all your deployment stages. So just reach out to us and make us aware of what are your needs. I would at this stage also again share my screen briefly with you, because I would like especially to thank Maarten, because he's about to retire. In 2 weeks he will be at least leaving the operational side of the world of the bus deployment, especially now in this important phase we are dealing with. Thank you very much. It has been definitely an honor and a pleasure to have you today and to work with you. We do very much hope that we will be able to meet also in the future, because you now start a new phase, but definitely we will be happy to have you and to count on you for other activities. And of course, thank you very much, Bart, also for your contribution today. But I would ask for a big applause for Maarten, and we wish you from UITP all the best, and of course from the Clean Bus Europe platform project. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so then hoping and that you have found a lot of answers in this session today. If there is any additional question, please just do not hesitate. Contact us, reach out. We are here for you. We will do our best to be able to fulfill your needs. And I would then also thank my colleague Arno and my colleague Sarah and Effe for the support today. And we will leave it here. Wishing you all a very nice afternoon, and we hope we stay in touch and meet again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adia.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.